There it is. Okay, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Younger Man's Game. My name's Eric, and I'm your host. And this is a podcast about living life on your feet, or about meeting life on your own terms, or just about me and my attempted upcoming thru hike of the Pacific Crest Trail, a 2,650-mile footpath that runs from the U.S.-Mexico border to the U.S.-Canada border. As of the publishing of this video, I am actually already out on trail. In fact, if you are watching this on the day it comes out, Friday, April 10th, you'll be watching this on my first day on trail. But today, I am actually not on trail. Today, I am simply in the woods near my home. Today is going to be part 3 of 5 of the PCT preview. 5 episodes where I go through the conditions and what to expect while hiking in the various sections of the Pacific Crest Trail. I'm doing this really as sort of a bit of a space filler, if you think about it, because, of course, if I'm already out on trail, that means I'm gathering material for my first episode that I'll publish from the trail. And that's going to be 3 or 4 weeks into my hike. I just don't want there to be a lapse in published episodes. So to some extent, this is really just an episode designed to have something for you all to watch while we're waiting for me to get my stuff together out on the trail and get those episodes ready. But the neat thing about these is that I'm using the technology that I'm going to be using on trail. And so a lot of this is kind of a gear shakedown for the tech gear that I'm using. So basically, I'm recording all of this stuff on an iPhone. And that involves obviously having a tripod, and I've got a small little monitor that I use so that I can set up the shots. I also have my microphone, which you can see here, and a battery bank, and a lot of this stuff. I mean, the last episode, I just forgot to use my microphone. I realized halfway into it, and was like, hey, well, we got to run it. Turns out the audio came out all right, but I like this certainly better. I am finding that shooting, editing, and uploading this stuff entirely from my phone as opposed to using a computer has its own challenges, the biggest of which so far seems to be battery life, and I'm wondering how that's all going to play out on trail. I guess we'll see how it goes. I mean, battery life for electronic stuff on trail is a thing. It's a relatively new thing for this old hiker. I come from a time before, actually, I started my distance hiking career before iPhones, or at least before I got my first iPhone. So I'm not used to having to carry all this extra battery power, but hopefully it'll all work out. And I'm imagining I'm going to have to upload these things from town or somewhere where I can get access to Wi-Fi. And we'll just see how that goes. Hopefully I can maintain a weekly schedule, but it just all kind of depends on how that works out. So today, at least, we're going to start diving into part 3 of 5 and talking about NorCal, Northern California, which will be the third section of the trail that I hike through. And of course, just like I did last episode, I'm reading today off of my little field notebook with all of the good stuff in it. And I'm also enjoying a cold snack here in my little Buc-ee's cozy. So let's get into it. NorCal, Northern California. This section of the trail basically starts wherever you want to think of the Sierra as ending. I know I talked in the last 2 episodes about there being some disagreement about where both the desert section and the Sierra sections begin and end. Well, at least end in the case of the desert section. The beginning is fairly obvious. Sierra has a little bit more flexibility. Beginning and end are potentially up for debate. And of course, if that's true, then the beginning of NorCal is also similarly subject to your interpretation. For our purposes, we're going to start at Donner Pass and just say that's where it starts. So essentially just past Lake Tahoe. And it ends at a fairly obvious spot, which is the California-Oregon border. So you've got about, let's see here. Looks like Donner Pass is, let me go back to my notes. So Donner's at about mile 1150, and the Oregon border is at about mile 1700-ish. So, I mean, that's a chunk of miles. I mean, you're talking about 11 to 17. That's, almost 600 miles of Northern California. It's a longer stretch than I think most people expect, especially, you're coming off of this experience of like this sweeping Sierra hike, and then you get into Northern California. Maybe you, in your mind, by the time you get there, or by the time I get there, I'll think it's like, oh, okay, well, I'll just hop, skip through NorCal, and then I'm into Oregon and Washington. But there's a good chunk of mileage there. And What's interesting about this section is that it's essentially the end of one mountain range and the beginning of another. So as of about let's see, as of about Downer Pass, you have essentially the end of the Sierra Nevada range and the beginning of the Cascade range. And the Cascade range is a volcanic mountain range that runs from Northern California all the way up to British Columbia in Canada. And it basically parallels the coast of North America. And it's a volcanic range and a young mountain range. And the thing about a young volcanic mountain range is it is volcanically and seismically quite active. These volcanoes make up the ring of seismically and volcanically active areas around all the countries that border what is known as the Pacific Rim, essentially the land masses that are adjacent to the Pacific Ocean. And so it's interesting stuff. You have the Cascade, the foundation of the Cascade mountain range is this sort of bedrock made up by thousands of small, short-lived volcanoes that erupted in the past and then were extinguished themselves. And then you also have these 13 major active volcanic centers that are usually pretty obvious because they're rising up out of the terrain. And you can see them quite clearly. This is especially true in Oregon and Washington, where these volcanoes just kind of tower over everything around them. But 3 out of these 13 peaks are actually in California. So we have Lassen Peak, or Mount Lassen. That's the first one I'll pass by after exiting the Sierras. That peak is about 10,457 feet, so that's no slouch. And then I believe that's near the high point on this, the highest elevation on the trail on this section. The second volcano in this range that you pass by is Mount Shasta, even bigger. The summit of Mount Shasta is actually at 14,162 feet, which, if you remember from the last episode, is almost as high as Mount Whitney. That's a very tall mountain, and if you've ever been to Northern California and seen Mount Shasta, you know it. Because it absolutely does just kind of rise up out of nowhere and dominate the skyline for miles around it. It's a beautiful, beautiful volcano. And then there's Medicine Lake, which is a smaller shield volcano. It's about 7,921 feet at its summit. And I'll be passing by all of these areas. These are all active volcanoes, interestingly enough. There's a lot of volcanic activity in the Cascades. And fun fact, Mount Lassen, which the last time it erupted was in the very earliest parts of the 20th century, in the teens. It erupted, I think, in 1915, and that eruption was so significant that, as a response, the first ever USGS volcano observatory was founded. So, these mountains are moving and shaking, and they're doing volcanic and seismic things, and that's fascinating. I think I'm very excited. Hopefully, not too they don't get too active, right? Like while I'm there, I don't I don't want to have to record a podcast about that time I had to run down a volcano avoiding an eruption. But hey, listen, I'm here for the experience. We'll see what happens. As a whole, the Cascades are much younger than the Sierras. And because it's a volcanic area, the volcanic soil, very fertile stuff, in combination with a relatively mild climate, make for a pretty lush environment. It's home to all manner of critters. There's plenty of wildlife there. Everything you see, up to this point on the trail exists in NorCal, and then you've got a lot of deer up there. You've got a lot of bear. There's all kinds of stuff living in those forests because it's a really heavily forested area. That's Northern California that's one of the key features of it. And the highest elevation I'll pass by, or pass over, I should say, is right around mile 1106. It's just actually past South Tahoe. So there again, I mean, if you're someone who thinks that the trail doesn't officially start until I-80 at Downer Pass, then you would consider this part of the Sierras. So it's perhaps up for debate. But that point will be 9,376 feet above sea level. And then the lowest point, which is at mile 1,657, almost into Oregon, is a place called the Sayad Valley, probably butchering that pronunciation. But that's only 1,374 feet. So, I mean, think about the range you experience in that, almost 10,000 feet down to almost sea level. It's a lot of ups and downs in this section. And The parks that I'll pass through, the national parks, there's only one national park in NorCal, I believe, and that is Lassen National Volcanic Park. I will also pass through a number of state parks, MacArthur Burney Falls State Park, as well as Castle Crag State Park. Lassen National Forest, it takes up a big chunk of the mileage here. And then there are wilderness areas. There's Bucks Lake Wilderness Area, Castle Crags Wilderness Area, Trinity Alps Wilderness Area, Marble Mountain Wilderness Area, and Russian Wilderness Area that make up the generally protected areas that I'll be walking through as I make my way north. Speaking of ups and downs, this is, I think, part of one of the things that the NorCal section of the PCT is known for. Are just a lot of hill climbs getting to and from the towns that you visit. Apparently, there's a town called Belden, which I've referenced before, which is technically that's about the end of, technically where the Sierras end and the Cascades begin, but there's a 14-mile hike to get to and from the town of Belden to resupply, and apparently it's pretty much all uphill going back up to the trail, so like a 14-mile climb straight up. So while the elevations are not as breathtaking or seemingly, hazardous as the high altitude, high country of the Sierras, there is a lot of climbing and descending to do as you make your way through NorCal on your way up to Oregon. So the environment there, the climate, it's, again, you're talking about massive amounts of coniferous forest and volcanic soil. It is, as in terms of climate, it is definitely drier in Northern California than it is in the Sierras, and again, especially this year with the low snowpack, I'm imagining there are going to be some dry runs. The most dry of which is the Hat Creek Rim area, which is infamous for having a more than 30-mile stretch where you have to carry water. So going back to what we were doing, if you need if you get about 4 miles to a liter, that's damn near 8 liters of water that I'll be having to carry, or I will just be a little bit thirsty by the time I get to my next water source. Yeah, it's I'm excited to see it. Interestingly, I have not. NorCal is the NorCal section is the only part of the PCT I have not hiked on. I have hiked in Washington, I've hiked in Oregon, I've hiked in the Sierras, and I've hiked in the desert, but I have yet to actually hike in NorCal for some reason. So I'm excited to see it. One thing that is very different about the NorCal section from the Sierra section is that you have no shortage of towns and resupply points, which by that point I'm sure I will welcome, honestly. I mean, this is, we've talked about the kind of the calorie deficit that I'm going to be in after months of doing that. The opportunity to stop and find food is going to be a welcome change, I think, from the Sierras, where, aside from the fact that there are a lot of fish swimming around those lakes up there, and I expect to be able to feed myself pretty easily using that and the food that I carry, it is nice to be able to go to a store or find, a place where you can sit down and have a meal. So the list of towns that is quite extensive through NorCal. And I'm listing these in order that I'll experience in them going NOBO. Obviously, if you were a southbound hiker, yes, I'm listing them backwards. So the first town you pass by north, and by the way, I'm not including South Tahoe South Tahoe in this, because that's basically the last town in the Sierras. First town you're going to pass by is Truckee, which is a little bit off trail. There is a small store called the Soda Springs store that's very close to being on trail at about the same point on the trail. That's about mile 1150. The next up at 1196. So there you have it. Only 40 miles later, I'll pass Sierra City. At mile 1265, there's a place called Bucks Lake, which is apparently just a resort, but it seems like they have some amenities there that hikers can use. Followed by Chester, California, which is at mile 1332. And then there's another resort, the Drake's Bad Ranch, at mile 1351. And we have Old Station at 1374. And there again, I mean, you're talking about 25 miles difference. So it's basically a 1 day of hiking, and you have no food that you have to carry if you can resupply in both of those places. Burning Mountain Ranch at 1411. There again, another one of these resort places, but apparently quite friendly to hikers. Bernie is a town that is, hiker friendly. That's at mile 1412. A little bit off trail though. You have to I think might have to catch a hitch into that. Castella or Castella, depending on, I don't know how they pronounce that, mile 1503. Mount Shasta, mile 1502. So those are basically at the same spot. Callahan Auto Parts, nope, just Callahan. Mile 1561. I mean, you can see that these things, the list goes on. Etna at 1600, and the Syed Valley at, I wrote 1374 here. I'm going to go ahead and guess that's 1674. Yeah, so that's 1674. I don't know why I wrote 1374. And then I'll be in Oregon. So, just like that, easy peasy, right? What to expect? What am I expecting on this trail? I'm going to reposition my legs here. I'm sitting crisscross here and my leg's falling asleep. Anyway, cheers, guys. So what am I expecting out of NorCal? Well, I mean, I don't know. To be honest, because this is the only place I really have no experience with, I'm not sure what to expect other than what I've read online, and I've learned to be quite wary of the things that one reads online. Among my hiking friends, among the people who have completed this section, I have gleaned some, I should say from my hiking friends, I've gleaned some information. And what's interesting is that the first thing that most people say that I've talked to who've hiked this section is that it's longer than they expected it to be. And the second thing that almost always comes out of their mouth is that it's kind of a letdown. And I think that is probably due to just if you think about it, how could it not be a letdown when you're coming out of a section like the Sierras, where you're just in this absolute, majestic mountain wilderness filled with, towering granite spires and big bowl-shaped valleys filled with flowing water and beautiful conifer forests. Yeah, no kidding. It's going to be a little bit of a letdown. Anything's going to be a letdown after that. But I think the biggest thing I'm looking forward to seeing, getting into the Southern Cascade Range, is going to be the sheer and stark difference between the active volcanoes and the forests around them. That's very similar to what I've seen in Oregon, and it's really quite something. You think of mountain ranges and you kind of think of peaks rising all around you, but then there's this is kind of a different mountain range where you just have these big monster volcanoes rising out of the forest around them. And I'm also really looking forward to being in a kind of a lush but dry forest. I love semi-arid and arid mountain forest. It's kind of my favorite topography and climate. So I'm very much looking forward to that. I am definitely expecting to run into some water carries that, especially around the Hat Creek Rim. But it's going to be a dry year, I would imagine, unless something changes, because it's just been a dry spring, right? The snowpack all over Cali and really all over the West Coast has been lower than usual. And then, last month in March, there was just that 2-week stretch where everything was just baking. And if the deserts of Southern California if the mountains up there are all dry, then the mountains in Northern California might be running the risk of having a similar situation develop. And so I imagine I'm going to have some big water carries, and we'll see what happens. But I'm not too worried about it, especially if these towns, which seem to be every 20 to 40 miles, are as advertised, because I'll have to carry way less food. So there's a bit of a give and take there in terms of pack weight. But I'm looking forward to seeing Mount Shasta, very much so. I've never really spent a lot of time. I've seen it. I've driven by it. I've been sort of impressed by its size and scale and the way it towers over all the surrounding environment. But I'm really looking forward to seeing it. And hopefully, I'm not sure how close to the actual mountain the trail goes, but I'm pretty sure it will pass by, and I'll have a chance to spend some time there. And I'm excited about that. And then of course, I think I'm just probably, I don't know. I think. It feels to me, at least in the run-up to this hike, and I don't know if this is how it's going to feel when I'm actually out on the trail, but it feels to me as though when you enter into NorCal, especially if you're a northbound hiker, you kind of that's sort of there's the before and after of who's really left on trail and gonna probably make it up to the border and finish out the hike, right? The desert is a bit of a proving ground in the sense that it's dry as hell. And it's, it's just for a lot of people, especially if you don't have any experience with this type of terrain, it's a brand new thing, and there's the mileage is new and the elevation profile is new, and a lot of people drop out in the desert. In 24, I dropped out in the desert. Of course, I didn't drop out because of anything that was happening with my hike. I dropped out because my dog got evicted from the house where he was staying, which was certainly sucked. But these things happen. But I did drop out in the desert section, as a lot of people do, and like it kind of thins the herd. And I think the Sierras really have a tendency to kind of like drop people off the trail because, the elevation gains are so massive that it really just, there's some people who just they're not in. They find out they're not as into it as they thought they were going to be, and of course the amount of miles you have to carry food through them, like it's a test. It's like a bit of a crucible in terms of the profile of this hike. But I feel like if you make it past Tahoe, and then you're into NorCal, like there's a lot of mileage left. I mean, look, what do we say the Sierras end around mile 1100? I mean, this is a 2,700 mile trail, so you're not even halfway when you get out of the Sierras. But somehow, it feels like the Sierras are this point of demarcation, and on the other side of it, if you still are walking north with a pack on your back, your odds of being one of the people who like walks across the border into Canada and touches that northern monument seem to go up. And I think maybe that's what I'm expecting out of this experience. I'm expecting to feel like, there's like I'm on the back nine, if you will, to use a golf analogy. I don't golf, but it's a handy analogy. But we'll see. I don't know. I wonder if I'm going to be like let down by it after the experience in the Sierras, or if I'm going to be pumped and excited that this is like a new thing that I haven't seen before because I've just not spent any time up there. In terms of gear, I'm now my thinking now is that I will probably take a few things that I'm mailing with my bear can to Kennedy Meadows, and mail them up to myself in the Sierras. Notably, I'm going to switch out my sleeping pad in the Sierras. Not that I don't love my little Z Foldy pad, it's great, but just, at night, at elevation, I feel like the temps are going to drop just low enough that I'm going to be happy that I had that, my little Nemo inflatable pad. And it's not even really so much about the R value as it is about the size of the thing. I'm a big guy, like I'm 6'1", 260. My frame is large enough that when I'm on that little Foldy Z rest, my elbows are like hanging off the side, which in the desert I don't think is going to matter at all, not one little bit. In the Sierras, I have a feeling my elbows are going to feel cold, and I'm going to be waking up in the middle of the night and kind of hating life if the temperatures drop low enough at night, which they very well could do. So my thinking is that I'm going to take my little inflatable Nemo pad, I'm going to mail it to Kennedy Meadows. So by the time I get to NorCal, I mean, your elevations start to drop off pretty dramatically. I mean, you saw the tallest point in NorCal is, I think, right around 8,000 feet, but that's at the beginning, and it just goes downhill from there. I'm thinking I'll probably bounce my switchback pad up to, somewhere around Donner, Truckee-ish area, and swap back out. And there's some other cold weather stuff that I think I'm going to include in that. Like, I'm not packing my thermal top, like my base layer top, for the desert. I'm not going to need that. The only thing I wear a thermal top for, there's 2 times in my hiking life that I put on a thermal base layer top. One is when I'm sleeping and it's cold. So if my elbows do poke out of the sleeping quilt or whatever, they won't freeze. And 2 is like a very specific temperature range usually in the morning when I'm first getting going, and it's just a little bit too cold for the sun shirt to be enough, but not quite cold enough for me to have my puffy on. So I mean, again, it's such a narrow range of conditions where I ever really want to hike with my thermal top on. But I have a feeling I'm going to need that thing in the Sierras, so I'm going to probably I'll probably pick it up in Kennedy Meadows and end up bouncing it, or just mailing it back home once I'm in NorCal. Because of those lower elevations, I'm expecting it to be a little bit warmer, honestly. I don't know. Who knows? We'll see. One thing that has crossed my mind, of course, and I think it's crossed a lot of people's minds, as it does in any year when the snowpack is low, is potential for fire danger. And NorCal, Oregon, and Washington all have like huge fire seasons that seem to get bigger and bigger every year. So, my fingers are crossed. I'm crossing every finger and every toe that I have in the hopes that I'm not going to end up having to miss any sections of the trail because of wildfire incidents. But of course, you take that as it comes. There's no controlling that sort of thing. But I mean, overall, I imagine the conditions will be pretty mild this summer. But then again, you are in the mountains. As I said last episode, you may not be in the ruggedly intense peaks and valleys of the Sierra High Country, but you're still at elevation. You're still in the mountains, and they do create weather events up there. So who the heck knows? We'll see. We'll see what happens. I'm looking forward to it. I'm super excited. And yeah, so for those of you out here watching it, if you're watching on April 10th, just know that I'm not in NorCal right now. I'm in Campo, California, just making my way north from the Southern Monument. And I cannot wait to tell all of y'all about everything I'm experiencing as I make my way through the desert. And I imagine, depending on what the broadcasting capabilities are going to be, what the Wi-Fi looks like, and how frequently I'm able to upload things, I imagine that if you're following along on this journey, you'll have a better chance of seeing what's going on if you're watching me on Instagram, because I imagine I'll be able to post some videos and shorts there much more easily than it looks like I'm going to be able to post content to this podcast. Certainly, getting my shit together here and getting things posted, it seems like it's going to require spending a significant amount of time on a Wi-Fi connection. So we'll see. I don't know. As I said at the beginning, this is a new thing for me, including this aspect to this journey. So I'm excited to see how it all plays out, and hopefully I'll have the opportunity to post things regularly. But even if I don't, I would imagine, again, if you're following on Instagram at Younger Man's Game, you'll be able to see what's happening in much closer to real time than you will here on the podcast. And yeah, that's it. That's pretty much it for this week's episode. Next week, I am going to release and publish part 4 of this series. Part 4 is going to deal with the Oregon section. Part 4 and 5 are both one state apiece. Part 4 is Oregon, Part 5 is Washington. I have spent some time hiking in the Cascades in Oregon, and I'm excited to tell you all about what I plan to experience there. Of course, what we actually see I experience, that's yet to come, and probably a few months away. But hope you've enjoyed this episode. I know it's a shorter one. Probably these next 3 might be a little bit shorter, just because I'm, it's like, how much can you really talk about something you haven't seen yet? Let's get out there. Let's have the experience. Let's put the feet on the ground, and then let's talk about what happens then. I'll mention again this week, and I'll probably make space at the end of every episode going forward. If you are interested in supporting this podcast in any way, I have made available a couple of different resources for you to do that. Basically, I am using both Venmo and Cash App. And if you want to support the podcast, you can message or just directly donate at Younger Man's Game on Venmo, or # Younger Man's Game on Cash App. Obviously, totally optional and voluntary. But if anyone feels the urge to do so, I can put that money toward, trail snacks and, rides to and from town if I can't hitch a ride. I don't know. I am showing a lot of leg, though, in these hiking shorts, so I feel like I'll be able to get a ride pretty easily. We'll see what happens. All right, y'all. We'll talk to y'all next week. In the meantime, take care.